individual symbolism within the ritual of Freemasonry, of course, the system as a whole does not have an overall symbolism imposed upon it. But this is what Matt Brown tries to do in his discussions. And he's wrong with it. I mean, bless his heart, he's a good man. But on Freemasonry, Matt Brown's not the right one to go to, I don't think. The institution as a whole is capable of almost infinite interpretation and explanation according to the tastes and needs of the individual member. Herein lies a paradox, because if the lack of official dogma is a great strength to the craft, it is also a weakness, because it not only enables individual brethren to put their own glosses on the lessons taught by Freemasonry, but it also allows our critics to misinterpret Freemasonry at will. And we have to live with that at this point, because the central tenet of a brotherhood is no dogma. And that's something that's hard for Mormons to understand, because in Mormonism we have a dogma, but we don't in Freemasonry. I can say that as a Master Mason. I absolutely know that's accurate. Unfortunately, it's hard to get a handle on, because what Freemasonry means to me is far different than what it will mean to Matt Brown. And he's not even a spokesman for Freemasonry as a Freemason. The ironic thing is, neither am I for the whole craft, but I can tell you what it means to me. One of the big problems I found in Matt Brown's article on the lambskin apron in the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies is his discussion of the apron from a Masonic point of view. He's simply wrong in how he uses his resources to minimize the Freemasonic apron. He'll maximize its antiquity and its powerful meaning and all of that information on the Book of Mormon, but he gives you just the bare minimum when it comes to Freemasonry. And that methodology is skewed. The problem with Matt Brown's approach is his bias dictates his conclusions. And his conclusions on Freemasonry, especially on the apron, are fundamentally unsound and never the last word. I'll show you what the source Matt Brown used sloppily is actually a very powerful evidence for the Freemasonic apron. No matter if a Freemason in 1897 said otherwise, like Matt Brown quotes. He ignores everything else said on it, though. That just doesn't work for me. Here's what Brown says about the Masonic apron on page 150 of the study. The symbolism ascribed by Masons to their white lambskin apron is that it represented innocence. But even this idea is not original to Freemasonry. Some Masonic researchers have come to the conclusion that the white apron's meaning was derived directly from the white garment given to the ancient Christians when they were initiated into a state of innocence at baptism. See Revelation 3:5. Here's where he uses Mackay in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. And what he says Mackay says is, Mackay admits that the association between the lambskin and innocence is not an original Masonic idea. Then he says, this concept goes much further back among the Israelites when the high priest entered the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Each element of the vestiture consisted of unadorned white linen, Leviticus 16:4. This clothing signified that on the sacred day the nation was reborn and became innocent before the Lord. See Revelation 19, verse 8. The various symbols that decorate Masonic aprons are also not original to Freemasonry, but came about through a long process of assimilation and evolution. It should be noted that some of the symbols found on Masonic aprons are identical to those found on Greek Orthodox liturgical aprons. So he says, essentially, that while he has found the antiquity of the Book of Mormon apron, the Masonic apron is an assimilated and evolved situation. It doesn't have ancient precedents except maybe to the Greek Orthodox liturgical aprons. He says Mackay even admits that the original idea of the Masonic apron being innocence is not an original idea. Now, what are we supposed to make of this? For one thing, Brown seems to think that it's critical that something be original, otherwise it's not authentic. We've never claimed the idea of the lambskin apron being innocence is original. Matt seems to be saying that that's a liability though, but it's not. If it's a liability with Freemasonry that there's nothing original, what about the Mormon concept itself? I'm not arguing against Mormonism, I'm arguing against Matt Brown's assumption. The idea of a Mormon restoration means a bringing back of what was had before. In that instance, there's nothing original in Mormonism. It can't be, otherwise it's not a restoration, it's an invention. But Mormonism isn't an invention, neither is Freemasonry with her symbols. Our scholars have already admitted, of course, that it's not original with us. It came from antiquity. The assumption Matt Brown seems to be laboring under is that the Masonic apron does not come from antiquity, but the Mormon apron does. That's a faulty assumption. He uses Mackay saying that the idea is not original to the Masonic idea, but he ignores the rest of what Mackay had to say about the antiquity of the theme of the Masonic apron. And quite frankly, it's a very poor performance on Brown's part to pick one little sentence out of 3 pages of what Mackay said about the Masonic apron. Let me read to you some ideas from Mackay, the real ideas that Matt Brown skips over because he's so biased. He has this determination that I have to show the antiquity of everything in Mormonism, but there's no antiquity at all to Freemasonry. It's simply a modern invention. And that's simply false. We can't trace the history of all the symbols and the ideas that we have in Freemasonry. But history does not dictate truth. What Mackay says, as opposed to the impression that Matt Brown leaves, is like the difference between night and day. Matt seems to think if it's not original, then it's not authentic. Nothing is further from the truth. If he takes that stance with Freemasonry, what's he going to do with Mormonism? There's nothing original in Mormonism, all the way from polygamy to plurality of the gods to new scripture to further current revelation. None of this is original to Mormonism. Being original is not the criteria for authenticity. Matt knows this, so why he pulls this silly argument up against Freemasonry is utterly beyond me. It's a silly argument. It's not an argument worthy of Matt Brown. So as a Freemason, let me set this record absolutely straight, because I take it seriously that the lambskin apron, the white lambskin apron, is the badge of a Mason. And I take great pride in wearing my lambskin apron. So I'm going to defend it against the lousy research of Matt Brown on this score. His bias apparently makes him want to minimize absolutely everything with Freemasonry, and that doesn't cut the mustard with me. And of course, my bias in favor of Freemasonry is I'm going to maximize it. I have that right as a Freemason. The question is, what does the lambskin apron mean to me personally? I'll let you know in a little while, probably on another video. Right now, here's Mackay's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the revised edition, volume 1. On page 72, under the word apron, there is no one of the symbols of speculative masonry more important in its teachings or more interesting in its history than the lambskin or the white leather apron. He says, we find the most satisfactory evidence that the use of the apron or some equivalent mode of investiture as a mystic symbol was common to all the nations of the earth from the earliest periods.